Hey guys, welcome back. If you've been here before, you know who I am. If not, my name is Madeleine Klein, and I talk about Canadian true crime and missing persons. Today I want to talk about the disappearance of 20-year-old Kenley Matheson from Wolfville, Nova Scotia. Jordan from the Nighttime Podcast and I talked about Kenley last Thursday live from the Nighttime Podcast YouTube channel. That episode will be released this week, either today or tomorrow, and I'll link it in the description box when it's available. The disappearance of Kenley Matheson has remained cold for the last 30 years. In preparation for our episode about Kenley, we watched the new documentary out on Amazon Prime called Missing Kenley, and I had no idea how many avenues this case went down. There are so many theories and hearsay and speculation, but we're really no closer to finding Kenley than we were 30 years ago. So Kenley was born May 8th, 1972 in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and started at Acadia University in September of 1992 when he was 20 years old. Kenley had taken 2 years off after graduating high school and traveled around and lived his best life. Immediately after high school, he bought a motorcycle and biked from Cape Breton to Banff, Alberta. That is 1,536 kilometers, or 52 hours of driving. I'm pretty sure in the podcast episode with Jordan, I said 5,000 kilometers, and that was way off. So if you listen to that, I was wrong. Anyway, he spent some time in the mountains, he planted trees in Prince George. He spent some time in the States on a walk to save the rainforest, and then he went off to Mexico and Belize and Guatemala, among other places. Eventually, he went back to BC and then ended up back in Cape Breton by the fall of 1992 to start university. It sounds like he was just a really cool, laid-back, free spirit who would have been just wonderful to hang out with. So on September 5th, 1992, Kenley and his 18-year-old sister, Kayreen, both arrive at Acadia University in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. It's said Kenley was pretty apprehensive about going to school. He was a little anxious. He was slightly older than the rest of the first years, and he wanted nothing to do with the frosh activities. Kenley was shy and quiet, but he was still adventurous and could make a friend quickly. He met a guy named Tom Gordon, who was an exchange student from England, and a young woman named Kristen Tomlinson very shortly after arriving in Acadia. And when I say very shortly after, I mean like almost immediately, because the very first weekend at Acadia, the three of them take a trip to a place called Corcomb's Island. Corcomb's Island is about an hour and 20 minutes outside of Wolfville, and Kristen's dad actually lived there. So the three went for the weekend, and it sounds like they had a really great time. It was an unseasonably hot September, so they got some time on the water, and yeah, they just had like the best weekend. Kenley was back in class by Monday, September 14th, and attended all week. On Thursday, September 17th, a friend of Kenley's saw him at a gas station on Main Street. Kenley was walking toward Acadia from like the outskirts of town, and it said he wasn't himself. This friend, his name was Chris, asked Kenley what he was doing, and he remembers Kenley saying something about doing laundry. He did not have a laundry bag with him, and there were laundry facilities available on campus. Chris offered Kenley a ride back to campus, which he accepted. The two stopped at the liquor store quickly before Chris dropped Kenley off. I think it's worth noting that also on September 17th, there are records of Kenley being admitted into hospital. To my knowledge, he was admitted due to mental health issues, but I am unsure of whether this was before or after the encounter with Chris. The next night, Friday, September 18th, there was a massive party at the Tower, which is like the dorm rooms at Acadia. Kenley got extremely intoxicated and started acting totally out of character. It's reported he was hitting on multiple women, many with boyfriends who were present, leading to altercations. I'm unsure of whether these were just verbal or whether they got physical. Kenley is not seen September 19th, and on September 20th, there are records of him pulling out $20 from an ATM on Main Street at 1:15 p.m. At around 4 p.m. that same day, Kayreen, Kenley's sister, goes to see him in his dorm room. She had been in Halifax over the weekend, so she wasn't at the party, but she had heard about what happened, so she went to go see Kenley to make sure he was okay. She said that when she went into his dorm room, Kenley was like sitting up in his bed with like cradling his head in his hands. It sounds to me like he had anxiety. The two of them made plans to do calculus homework together the following night on Monday, September 21st. At 9 p.m. that same night, the resident assistant Todd Barker came to Kenley's door. He had some sort of document he needed Kenley to sign. Kenley answered the door by cracking it only a few inches and talking to Todd that way. But Todd said that wasn't super odd behavior from Kenley. That's just kind of how he was. One other thing that Todd noted was that he was under the impression Kenley was ironing when he visited his dorm, which isn't that odd if you ask me. And when they asked Kenley's mom about the ironing thing, she was like, yeah, that's not weird. He took good care of his clothes and he would iron his shirts sometimes. On Monday, September 21st, Kenley would not attend classes, but his friend Tom would see him walking on Main Street. Tom said that Kenley didn't seem to be in a rush or anything. He just looked normal, gave him a little wave, and was on his way. Kenley's mom and sister would both try and contact him that day on the 21st. On September 22nd, no one saw or spoke to Kenley. On September 23rd, Kayreen is pretty concerned at this point, so she talks to the RA, Todd Barker, and says, no one's seen Kenley in a couple days. Will you please let me into his room? There were notes on his door that said, call your mom, call your sister, where are you? Both Todd and Kayreen were prepared for the worst. They were prepared to walk into a suicide. Kenley's room didn't seem super out of place. It wasn't neat and tidy. It looked lived in, but nothing looked out of the ordinary. There weren't signs of a struggle. His belongings, for the most part, were all there. His clothes and passport remained in the room, although his shaving kit was gone. Kenley's father went down to Acadia on September 24th, and he was officially reported missing. This is pretty much where the scent ends. From here on out, there's only theories. Kenley's disappearance was never treated as criminal. His dorm was never taped off and investigated, no evidence was ever taken, and people weren't questioned right away. Due to Kenley being a little bit of a nomad, police automatically assumed he left on his own accord and didn't want to be found. Even though there was over $4,000 in Kenley's bank account when he disappeared, and it hasn't been touched since. There were reported sightings of Kenley in 1993, but nothing confirmed, obviously. So I'm known to be a little bit gullible and easily convinced. But the alleged sightings of Kenley that are explained in the documentary convinced me. 2 out of the 4 we'll go over are just it's too close. Bear with me, we'll start from the beginning. So the first possible sighting was by an uncle of Kenley's. Kenley's uncle was in the Halifax airport, and when he was walking past the bar, he made eye contact with a young man in a backwards baseball cap. The uncle immediately was like, was that Kenley? And stopped, and a moment later turned around to go. He was so sure that was Kenley, he turned around to go look if it was him. When he went back to where this young man was standing, he wasn't there, but there was a full cold beer where he had been standing. He looked around the airport and he even walked outside, and this man was nowhere in sight. Another report came in August of 1993 from a man named Ian. Ian said that he had seen and talked to Kenley in Halifax 4 months prior in April, but didn't know he was missing until he saw a missing persons poster. He called it in and said that his interaction with Kenley was normal. Kenley seemed unbothered. The thing about Kenley and this guy Ian is that they had met in Annapolis Valley when they were children. Ian said that the two had met back in 1981 in Annapolis Valley when they were dirt biking. Kenley and his family did in fact camp in Annapolis Valley back in 1981 when Kenley was 9. The next month, in September of 1993, a man named James was standing in line at a bar called The Palace in Halifax. He met somebody in line and struck up a conversation with him. This man told James that he was going to Acadia. James told this man that he was going to some other school in PEI. And this man said, "Oh, you might know my cousin, Wendell. He's going there as well." Lo and behold, James did know his cousin Wendell and was actually friends with him. At one point, James turned around to talk to his other friend, and by the time he turned back around, this man was gone and he never got a name. The following week, James was back in PEI and ran into Wendell and said, "Hey, I met your cousin in Halifax this weekend." Wendell was like, who would this be? And obviously, James didn't get a name, but he said, could you describe him for me? When James started describing him, he started to describe Kenley. Wendell said to James, if I showed you a picture, would you be able to identify him? And James was like, yeah, probably. When he saw the photo of Kenley, James is 100% certain that was the man he was talking to in line that night. Even over 2 decades later, when James saw a photo of Kenley, he still maintains that that was the man he was talking to. He is so sure. It would be another 4 years before another reported sighting of Kenley occurred. In February of 1997, a woman in London, Ontario, had a man come to her door one evening canvassing for Greenpeace. Coincidentally, this woman shared distant cousins with Kenley in Cape Breton. In August of 1998, this woman went and saw her family in Cape Breton and saw a photo of Kenley on their wall. She asked who this person was because she was so sure she had met him before. Once she made the connection, she was sure that this young man, who had been missing for nearly 6 years, was the young man that had been at her door that previous February. She took the photo of Kenley back to London, Ontario, and took it to the Greenpeace office. She asked reception if they recognized the man or if they knew if he had worked for them in the last couple years. The woman said that she recognized him, but couldn't or wouldn't elaborate further. None of these sightings have been 100% confirmed, but the cousin one and the Annapolis Valley guy are too personal. However, if Kenley decided to just up and leave, why would he hang around Halifax for so long? But I guess you never know. Stranger things. Many believe Kenley ended his own life. He struggled with depression and possibly other mental health issues. It's also said that Kenley may have been struggling or questioning his sexuality. He may have been gay or bi, but nothing is confirmed. Today, it's a known statistic that youth that are questioning their sexuality or are part of the sexual minority are 3 times more likely to attempt to take their own life. Transgender youth are 5 times more likely. And those are just today's statistics. 30 years ago, things were a lot different, so that leads me to believe that the statistics were higher then. If you haven't, watch Pray Away on Netflix. It is heartbreaking and compelling. Not only was Kenley independent, but he was quite the outdoorsman. He was very familiar and in touch with his surrounding area of Nova Scotia. If he wanted to go somewhere he wouldn't be found, he would know where to go and how to get there. I'm wondering if Kenley suffered some sort of break or episode and left on his own accord, spent some time in Halifax, made his way to Ontario, all somehow remaining invisible. Did he fly under the radar for years and then decide to take his own life? Or is he still out there somewhere? In 1992, it would have been a lot easier to start a new life. Another interesting theory is that dangerous offender and sexual predator Andrew Paul Johnson had something to do with Kenley's disappearance. Investigators place Andrew Paul Johnson at the Ovens campground, which is only 25 kilometers from Corcomb's Island, the same weekend Kenley was there. It's also alleged that Andrew Paul Johnson had dinner at the Tomlinson house, where Kenley and his friends were staying. Not only did Andrew Paul Johnson claim to have never met Kenley before in his life, he also denies ever being on Corcomb's Island. And when he was shown a photo of the Tomlinson house, he said that he has no memory of ever being there. Side note, I'm going to talk about Andrew Paul Johnson next week and go a little bit more in depth into him, so stay tuned for that. I know you can't trust a psychopath, but I would be really surprised if Andrew Paul Johnson had anything to do with Kenley's disappearance. I mean, never say never, but the evidence is a little bit too lackluster for me. During the filming of this documentary, there was a little bit of speculation on whether or not someone had been in Kenley's dorm between Sunday and Wednesday when Kayreen and Todd went in. During an interview in this documentary, Kristen claims that she and Tom were let into Kenley's dorm by Todd, the RA. Kristen is adamant she saw Kenley's red and black backpack in the room. However, she's the only one that seems to remember this. Todd maintains the first time he went into Kenley's dorm was with Kayreen, and Tom also has no memory of entering his room. Tom states that Kenley was wearing this backpack in question the last time he saw him on Main Street. What we need to remember is that these events happened 30 years ago and people remember things differently. When something like this happens, people tend to overanalyze any last conversation or event. Over the course of 3 decades, I'm sure some details will be lost, misconstrued, or just plain dreamed up. The same woman, Kristen, found a hat Kenley had left at her dad's house months after his disappearance. She, for whatever reason, decided to turn this cap into police, so there's documented proof of this. However, she has no memory of doing that. Even when the filmmakers remind her of this, she's like flabbergasted. It didn't even trigger the memory for her. She actually said, "I did?" So another theory mentioned in this documentary was the Kenny family. In 2016, somebody calls Crime Stoppers and tells them that a member of their family admitted to killing Kenley many years ago. I guess these people were driving and this woman asked her then son, Jason Kenny. This person has since transitioned, and I absolutely do not want to misgender or dead name, so I will be calling them Aaron, as that's their name. Anyway, Aaron's mother asks them if they remember that boy from Acadia that went missing and if they wonder what happened. Aaron then said something to the effect of, "He did something he shouldn't have, and we took care of him, and they'll never find him." The family themselves were convinced that Kenley was on the family property, but then Aaron's sister chimed in and claims that Aaron, 25 years prior, came home one night and said that they had put Kenley in a bear cave. So Crime Stoppers didn't actually take this tip seriously. This family contacted the private investigator that Kenley's family had hired. Everything is hearsay. Absolutely nothing links Kenley and Aaron, except for the fact they both attended Acadia University. This report came 25 years after the fact as well. Of course, Kenley's family is going to go down absolutely every avenue possible because they are desperate to bring their boy home. The Kenny property was searched, but it was lackluster. I would compare the search to me vacuuming my room as a child. They went in and were like, "This is good," and left. If Kenley's body is on that property, they will need dogs and or ground penetrating radar, not a quick glance with the naked eye. Also, only a small portion of the property was searched. The Kenny family theory is terribly flimsy and a little confusing. I realize lie detector tests aren't permissible in court, but after a couple years of being bothered, Aaron did in fact take a polygraph test and passed. So that's the story of the strange disappearance of Kenley Matheson. If you think about it, we're not any closer to knowing what happened to Kenley than we were on September 21st, 1992. Any information or tip did not solidly lead anywhere. I can see why this case is still talked about 30 years later. I know the new documentary on Amazon Prime has really helped get us talking about Kenley. It's called Missing Kenley. Give it a watch if you're interested in this case. I don't know what I think happened to Kenley. Logic tells me he most likely took his own life, but I am baffled by those 2 sightings that were reported. A big part of me wants to believe that he did just leave on his own accord and start a new life. Do I think he's alive today if that was the case? Probably not. Maybe both theories are right, and he left on his own accord and took his own life years later. Who knows? No one but Kenley. I want to hear what you think happened that September in 1992. Let me know in the comments. As always, I will have a couple links in the description box. I'll have Jordan and I's episode of Missing in Canada linked, as well as my link tree if you want to check out any of my other content or feel moved to follow me on any socials. Remember, Jordan and I are live every Thursday night from the Nighttime Podcast YouTube channel discussing a creepy or strange Canadian true crime case. And you can catch new videos from me every Tuesday on my YouTube channel. I want to thank you guys so much for being here. I super appreciate you. And that is it for me until next time. Bye.